Welcome to Divinely Empowered with Antonia. Today we have the lovely Jessica Taylor, who is a Pleiadian channeler. She works with Kistos, a seventh dimensional being. Tell us more about that, Jess.
Kistos is a seventh dimensional Pleiadian, and he brings through both individual and collective consciousness as well. So although he's able to provide kind of perspectives from an individual consciousness, he can also connect in with the whole of the seventh dimension and the frequency that he is connected to, which brings through a broader perspective. And the Pleiadians read energy from us and from us as humans and our human experience, and read the energy of our different timelines and the different potential timelines that we can move into as well.
So if you haven't seen Jess before, we've got videos on my YouTube channel. So to go and check those out. And what are we going to be diving into today?
We are going to try and get into some of the ancient past, some of our connections to ancient alien races, if there are any there, understanding a bit more about how our reality has been shaped by our consciousness and what we are connected to. We were going to ask a little bit about actual biological connections to ETs as well. And I think there's quite a few other aspects that we wanted to deep dive into.
Great. So are you ready at home? If you have any other questions for Jess, please let us know in the comments.
Perfect.
All righty, whenever you're ready.
Yeah,
bring him through.
Yes, welcome. We are glad to make this connection with you again today. And there are many different aspects that we have been wanting to bring through with Jessica. And I've asked her to put some of these questions forward so that she may be able to answer this more fully through us. So when you are ready, we would like you to proceed with your questions.
Thank you very much, Kistos. So we have a question from Lucius. And Lucius asks, I would like to know, how does one get started communicating with other beings?
One of the main aspects that you need to bring yourself into alignment and realization with, if you wish to make these connections with higher dimensional frequencies and beings from those places, is to lift your own vibration first. You see, when you are in a lower state of vibration, it makes it more probable that you will have interceptions from different beings and entities that are also in a lower vibration, which can sometimes cause distortion or bring through ideas that maybe aren't for your highest and greatest good, both individually and collectively. So in order to open yourself up to receiving these frequencies and be trusting and knowing that they are genuinely from beings that are for your benevolence and for higher guidance and connected to your higher consciousness also, and working through that higher level of consciousness, then taking time to practice raising your own vibration, raising your own energy into states of more joy, into states of love, into states of high compassion, will help to ensure that you are in a state of vibration that is receiving quality information. You are able to channel beings from different human spirits when your vibration is slightly lower. And if you practice mediumship and learn some of the conventional routes to psychic development, that will help you in your beginning stages to become discerning as to whether the entities, beings, or spirits that are trying to connect with you are benevolent, or whether they are possibly something that is trying to intrude on your consciousness or trying to intrude on your physical body. But that is something that you would want to do with guidance to ensure that you do it safely. So the more that you can practice going into states of depth and meditation, then that will help you to make that connection. For Jessica herself, she began with conventional mediumship. So she did learn the techniques in order to trust her own intuition that the guidance she was receiving was genuine, by receiving information from other humans that were detailed and able to provide very strong confirmations of what she was seeing and what she was saying. And then as her vibration started to alter through states of meditation, she was able to start making connections with us. And initially that just began as connecting to our consciousness and feeling through meditation and bringing in messages that way. And once we felt that her frequency was able to hold us making a direct transmission, that was when we allowed that to happen. But it was a gradual process, and one that she consented to, and took lots of time to know that what the connections that she was receiving and establishing were genuine and benevolent.
Great. Thank you. So the next question is, what are mermaids?
There are different aspects to this question, because you are often, as humans, thinking of something as one particular thing, one particular type of being or species. There are multiple different potentials for this question, in terms of there are multiple different potentials of beings and entities that you might attribute to or consider being a mermaid. There are entities that have existed on your planet previously, that during times of great change, such as the times where Atlantis and Lemuria fell, some of those beings moved into a different frequency or into a different aspect of dimension within what you currently perceive as reality. So there are always multiple worlds, multiple dimensions occurring alongside with you. When Atlantis and Lemuria fell, and also in times where other civilizations that you have previously had on your planet, many that you do not yet know about, when those were disrupted, the frequency within your planet was greatly altered, and that caused for a certain amount of the different beings that were existing there to hop into a different frequency and or dimension, so that they could continue to have a physical experience, although it was less physical than how you feel the density of your human body. So many of you may be aware of this idea of a movement between a third dimensional and fifth dimensional shift occurring at the moment, and how that may play out to many of you is that you will become unaware of each other because you are moving into different dimensions. Although we think that the split here may cause a greater impact than sometimes has occurred previously, but that's a separate trajectory, and we do not wish to confuse you too much by going into that at depth within the context of this question. So these beings that you perceive as being mermaids, there are some of those that are from previous times and previous civilizations. Many of them come from the times of Atlantis. There was a hybridization program going on in Atlantis. Back towards the time when it fell. And there were different species being mixed together. This was the hybridization process. They were seeing how they could adapt different bodies to live in different aspects of your planet. And also they were trying to adapt bodies that were able to transverse more than one dimension, so that they could move in and out of different dimensions and feed information back through. But it didn't work out very well. So many of the beings that you perceive as being mermaids were from the time of Atlantis. And when the civilization fell, they had always been on your planet, but they went into a dimension where you started to rarely be able to perceive them. So they have always been here since that hybridization program occurred. There were beings before that were amphibious, many of them coming from different star systems, a lot from the Orion and Sirius systems, that were inhabiting your planet, but they would have looked much more amphibious, not quite as much like a fish, but not with the same human form that you picture a classical mermaid as being. And they were already there, and that's where they took some of the genetics, the material to create part of that hybridization process. And again, some of those actually just went into the depths of the ocean, the places where the frequency was being less affected, and were living in a way that was much more survivalistic. So it was in a very different frequency to the beings that were living at the surface and part of hybridization processes and part of the human form and the human body. And then later on, so where you get some of your folk tales from, where there have been sightings of these different types of folk, a lot of that goes back further in your past, and you're getting those sightings less frequently now, because partly to do with the difference in the frequencies that you're able to perceive, but also back in those times where those sightings were common, it was also more common to have sightings of different types of beings that you consider mythological, such as fairies, because there was less information and technology overriding a lot of the human consciousness. So although you may perceive these times as being darker because there was maybe less conscious, compassionate awareness between humans, there was a stronger connection to the natural and interdimensional world. And so those sightings were much more common during those times, and the frequencies that were emitted from them, so sometimes their sounds, there were people were more sensitive to those in those times because they were more aware and connected to the intuition.
So, are there good and bad mermaids? There are tales of sailors and mermaids singing them to their death.
A lot of that is actually more to do with the fact that the people that were witnessing these different beings, as they were traversing the different dimensions and able to tune into the sound and frequency, it caused a distortion in their energetic field, because instead of perceiving the sound as a healing frequency, which sometimes it was, sometimes it did cause harm and distortion, but often the harm and distortion came because the beings that were witnessing it were put into a state of fear by the unfamiliarity. And it was like an energetic cause and reaction. So the feeling of the fear started to distort the frequency of the sounds that they were hearing and caused essentially confusion. It was as though you're trying to cross and traverse two different dimensions that weren't in a fluid resonance with each other. There was no equilibrium between the two, and therefore the intent behind these merfolk was not exactly to cause harm. It was to make communication, but it was with beings that were not ready to receive that level of communication, that were not ready to interact in that same way. And the fear coming from those people creates a like a chemical almost reaction, except it's a reaction through the sacred geometry, through the energetic field, and through the energetic layers that give the gateways to different dimensions to enable communication. And this is actually part of the problems that were occurring in Atlantis when they were trying to traverse different dimensions. There were often issues like this where the frequencies that were being communicated from one to another were causing harm because they were jarring to something that was in a slightly different frequency, a slightly different reality. So it was essentially a problem that had occurred previously too, but it occurred on a much bigger scale through Atlantis. There have been forms that you would perceive as being demonic. We just talk about them as low vibrational frequencies and low vibrational entities. So different beings from literally from a lower frequency that are trying to attach onto higher level energy, that would use a certain type of camouflage, much as the reptilians, the ones that have malevolent intent from the Draco system, use a camouflage in order to be able to be amongst you sometimes. And essentially, some of those beings that you perceive as being merfolk were the same kind of thing. They're ET races, or some of them were within the Earth's dimension, so not from another star system. From the Earth system, that were using this kind of disguise, this kind of camouflage, in order to try to piggyback on the frequency of humans, which was slightly higher. And this is what you have sometimes now with Draco and the Reptilians, is that they are trying to piggyback onto a higher frequency. Some of them are doing that because they wish to create a dynamic of control or uphold a dynamic of control. But there are some who are now trying to do that to release themselves from being in a lower vibration and lift the frequency of their own star system.
What's going on at Es Vedrà, which is an island off the coast of Ibiza? There's lots of UFO sightings. A compass. It's always goes out. The magnetism is the third most magnetic place on Earth, and the compass spins. What's going on there? Are there giants there? Is it portals to other realms? What's happening at Es Vedrà?
There is a connection deeply within that island that goes down into the sea. It is like, for part way, it looks like a tunnel. So you would see it as a physical thing. If you were able to go, there's a pool on the island that is an access point, and you can go down and it starts taking you below the depths of the sea. But once you go past a certain depth, it becomes like an energetic portal. So many of you as humans perceive wormholes or energetic portals as being something that occur in space, and you can use that to access space travel and go very, very far. But there is a lot between your beneath your oceans that you do not know about, that is undiscovered. There are depths that you have not yet looked at. You've actually, as a species, you have spent more time and money researching space and trying to understand that than you have the deepest parts of your ocean. So once you get beyond a certain depth, beneath that island, there acts as an energetic wormhole and can take you to the most deep parts of the oceans, where there are still some species that are existing. Predominantly, you won't be able to detect them because their physical form is so finite, and you would not be able to make that actual physical journey because it is too in contrast with your human body, same as certain aspects of space are. You need lots of equipment to be able to travel into certain atmospheres within space. But yes, essentially it takes you to some of the layers of the sea where there have been parts of the ancient civilizations that have been lost, that have gone there as the earth has become destabilized, and some of these beings were not able to leave and move back to their own star systems or their own planet. Some chose to remain because they wished to remain. Some had to remain because they had become too much in a physical body. And this is something that has happened on your planet with civilizations where the physical form is on the land as well, where different beings from different star systems have come and spent time here, and some have collected too much density in order to then be able to make the transition back into a lighter form to move back to their own planet. So this has occurred between beneath your oceans also, and there is actually more evidence and more life still present that is connected to what you would perceive as ancient aliens or ancient star systems beneath your oceans than there is on the surface, and that there has been on the surface for a long time.
Is it guarded by a giant?
There are beings, it's not one specific giant in the way that you understand it from your fairy and folklore. There are some beings there who have existed on many places throughout your whole planet, and you have found different evidence for them before. We know that a lot of it has been suppressed, but many of you are starting to realize and discover some of these ancient skeletons, for example, now. Yeah, there are still some of those beings within that space, but they are not always in physical form. So they have managed to survive and stay there in a way that is different to the ancient skeletons that you found, because the skeletons they are beings that took a much more physical form, a lot more density, and therefore they didn't have what you will perceive as a superpower, the abilities that actually came very, very naturally to them in order to keep themselves safe and hidden and not outnumbered. So yes, there is beings there that are connected to those ancient people that come from different star systems, many of them from Pleiades, but they are much more energetic than they are in physical form. So they do appear, they're able to appear, we're able to appear from this layer in Pleiades. We're able to take a physical form and present it if it's necessary to do so. And essentially it's the same thing for these beings. The stature that they choose to portray is really as something to play into your folklore, to play into the psychology of a human in order to restrict the desire to actually go to this place, to create a certain level of fear. They're not malevolent entities, but they are trying to prevent access to these lower depths within the sea. Although we do think that you might start to actually be able to access those points, and discoveries are going to be made within the next 3 to 5 years of more of these civilizations under the sea. You're going to start actually seeing more evidence of them being there, because the consciousness is changing on the planet and starting to come back into an alignment with the beings that chose to go down there and create a different kind of civilization, because the surface level and the human collective and the human consciousness was becoming too aggressive for them to be able to exist there safely.
There was a monk who was exiled to Es Vedrà. What happened to him when he was exiled there?
He lived remained predominantly in a human form, but was able to learn how to use the energy of that place. So the energy, because it's so connected to that portal, creates, if one knows how to use it properly, it creates the ability to start to shift the body's density enough to start to move in and out of physical form.
I think he was allegedly chased around. Was it quite dangerous for him living on there? He was there a number of months and then ended up having to come off it because it was very scary.
The being that came off of the island isn't the being that went onto the island. So
what happened to the one who went onto it? Did he die?
No, he shifted frequency enough to be able to start to cohabit in a way with these different beings and start to learn from it, and they could learn from the human consciousness of that being also. And so essentially the being that came off of the island was a being that was a shape-shifted version.
Is it safe to visit Es Vedrà?
At this point, it will be in strong contrast to the human energy field for most humans. And you would be likely to, because you haven't experienced a lot yet in terms of interdimensional beings. So, for example, if you go and walk through some of the great open lands of America and you pass something that you perceive as being a Bigfoot or a Yeti, then you can go into a very strong state of fear because it's something that is so unknown to you. And sometimes that fear has actually caused a person to be affected by the frequency of the thing that they're seeing. So when you see a being such as a Bigfoot in this open land, in your human perception of reality, it's because those beings are able to easily adapt and move between different dimensions. And there's also an element of the witness in that moment being slightly less attached to than usual to their regular reality. And that is why they have the fluidity to be able to have that experience. So this is why often the sightings are in places that are out in nature. It's not that the beings, the Bigfoots, are only living in those places. They live in many places on your planet, but the expansiveness that happens to the human energy field when they're in those places opens them up enough to the possibility of being able to see that being. But then quite quickly, because they see it, they shut down and move into a state of fear or into a state of unease, and it brings them slam back very quickly into the human body, and sometimes down some in terms of vibration. And there have been occurrences where the vibration has been so drastically altered that the timeline of that individual then becomes altered and moves into a different reality. So they do not move into a different dimension, but they jump onto a different timeline, which affects everybody that has perceived them also. So it comes as a disappearance. So the family and the friends do not know where that person has gone to. And they are just experiencing their family and friends in a totally different way. So there are many things that you can have an experience as a human that have a great energetic impact on the timelines of those around you too. You do not you're not able to take away the free will of others. And there is an element of these experiences being pre-contracted in order for those human souls to grow and develop from that point. But in terms of whether it would be safe for you to be on this island or not, it would be very similar to a person who suddenly sees a Bigfoot or suddenly sees a mermaid that maybe looks aggressive in its physical features. It can actually move you quite quickly into a vibrational state that you wouldn't want to be in. So you could appear as being removed from the planet, but you are just moving into a different frequency and timeline. So we would not advise it at this point because the consciousness is not quite ready to have that experience in a way that is expansive and making a connection with the different beings and the different entities or energies that you might experience there. But within the next 3 to 5 years, again, we think this timeline is very, very close for you. Your consciousness is shifting so much that in the near future, you might be able to go to such places and have those experiences because you won't be going there and met with a state of fear to begin with.
Why hasn't Bigfoot been caught in any of the cameras?
There have been some footage that is genuine.
On trail cams, they haven't been caught. And there are so many trail cams all around all these big expanses in America. And they disprove Bigfoot onto those grounds that they're not on the trail cams.
So a lot of the requirements, you're talking about using a technology that is in the vibration of your current frequency in order to capture something that is in a totally different vibrational reality. So the reason that a person observes the Bigfoot is because their consciousness is able in that moment to make that connection. There have been some technologies where it has been momentarily captured, but we realize that this is rare. But so frequently when it is set up with an expectation to disprove something, for a start, which affects that creates an observation that alters a reality. Whereas when there have been times where somebody has captured this footage because they are just choosing to capture the nature, they are not specifically looking for this particular being, they are open and attuned with the frequency. So the energy that they're putting into their own technology is not disrupting the harmony of the different dimensions and therefore altering the outcome of the reality.
There's a story which talks about being in, I think it was either Vietnam or Korea, when they first invented the infrared night vision goggles. Sorry, not yeah. In Korea they invented, or Vietnam they invented night vision goggles, and obviously we've got they are green. Getting muddled with it. They invented night vision goggles, and your display is green on them. They also simultaneously, allegedly, weren't sure which color to go with in the color spectrum. They were either had red versions and they had green versions, and they weren't sure what to go with. Allegedly, young soldiers then ended up seeing demons with these red screens, and they were shooting wildly into the air because they were seeing demons. Would that be technology you can see into different dimensions?
Yes, and quite often because those beings are going into that situation with fear, it's not that they are only able to see demons, it's because they're going in. Many of the people that you put into these circumstances as humans have already carried a lot of trauma. They've already have quite a lot of entity attachment, and programs that they have not overridden. And even if it's the first time that they are experiencing anything active within the field, a lot of the conditioning that moves them to be able to take this job and take this position anyway, even from when they were very young children, has affected their vibration in a way that is very different to somebody who has had a very open and expansive human experience that is in high states of consciousness. So already before they even go into that place, into that environment or circumstance, they are energetically speaking, they're at a disadvantage and more likely to experience something that appears as negative. And so then you combine that with the fact that many of them that go into these circumstances have also been working within that field and experienced a lot of trauma, the first response that they have when they experience anything that is of a different dimensional nature is to see it as something that is an enemy or something that is demonic, where really it's just a different entity from a different dimensional frequency that sometimes just wants to make communication. But you take a lot sometimes when you look into spirituality. You can also take away sometimes from how much your mind is able to create certain realities too. So your energy and your vibration creates a lot of your realities. But if you allow the mind to become the running program, so the ego to become the running program, then that will affect a lot of your reality also. So yes, some of this technology that was developed did indeed allow for looks into different dimensions, a bit like the photography where you can detect different layers of the aura. There are technologies that allow you to see and expand and experience different dimensions and realities, but it is greatly in the position of the user as to what is an experience. We have been asked in times before about whether if you were able to use a wormhole to cross to another side of the universe, whether it would be likely that you would experience a dimension where there is fear and chaos and violence. And we have said what you potentially experience if you go into that kind of travel, if you are able to make that kind of jump, will greatly depend on the people who are making the jump. If they are expecting collectively a huge amount of fear and violence, and if they have had a lot of trauma before, then they are likely to experience that as a reality. But it is not necessarily something that is dangerous to do if the higher vibration of the people behind the project is with the intent in higher consciousness. And we think that this is a lot to do with why, as humans, you haven't actually been able to achieve some of the things that you have desired to do in terms of technology, in terms of travel through to different areas of space and different dimension, because there is almost a pre-contracted understanding that your consciousness is not yet at a point where you can do that safely. And if you don't do it safely, the ramifications of that will have an effect throughout the whole of the universe and will affect the consciousness of all beings throughout the universe. It's not just you that is affected. So as you find that the consciousness starts to lift, you may find that the energetic restrictions on that kind of travel start to be lifted, but you will recognize and feel differently about the idea of this kind of travel because the consciousness will be higher and the technology developed by those who are in high states of consciousness and using it in a more benevolent way.
So let's move on to ask about the aliens or the potential aliens that they found in around Nazca. So there are 3-fingered aliens which have recently been discovered, mummies of them. Are they real? Where are they from? Give us some information on the Nazca aliens.
So there are many of these throughout your planet. Some of them have been faked, but most of them are genuine. And a lot of them come from previous civilizations. So this goes back to what we were saying closer to the beginning when we were talking about the beings that inhabit under the water. There have been beings from many different star systems that came here in what you would perceive as your ancient past, although you've had much further past, many more civilizations before the ones that you have any awareness of now. And they took physical form in order to remain on your planet. And in some cases, they hybridized with humans, so they bred with humans. And a lot of those are the ones that were not able to leave because they had that kind of interaction that moves through your lower energy centers, which really grounds you into your planet and grounds you into your human experience. So they were the ones that predominantly stayed, and that's where you get some of your bloodlines from that are related to extraterrestrial species. And so the skeletons are just some of those beings that have managed to move down through more layers of generations, more civilization than most of them were able to survive. And they did that predominantly by spreading out and going to places that were at the far off reaches of the rest of human civilization, as the human civilization went through a time where it went through a lot of fear and was very aggressive to anything that appeared different to its regular observation of reality.
What are the Nazca Aliens for, and who made them?
They are connected to the Arcturian system and also connected to a lot of the energy lines that you have in the northern regions of your planet as well. So there are some along France, some within Britain. They take very different appearance, and a lot of their formations, so the energy systems were already there, and then the beings that were living at that time, so predominantly human, but some with guidance of hybridized species, were able to tune in and start to form physical manifestation of these energy lines. So some later on, much later on, there was certain types of building that were occurring, such as some of the stone circles, and later pyramids, various things to mark certain points, certain energy points, to try and contain some of the energy and then amplify it outwards. But a lot of the initial lines that you see and where the pathways actually form is very similar to how how your crop circles are created, is through the consciousness, the collective consciousness, creating a kind of plasma of energy and manipulating the landscape through that energy.
Who created them?
There's a lot of them are strongly connected to the Arcturians.
So okay,
But there are different star systems that have, especially with when you go later into the crop circles, and the more within the northern hemisphere is connected more to the Pleiadians, whereas the southern with the South America and some of those through to North America as well has stronger connection to the Arcturians. But then you have also a movement from the North of America into the European continents, where there is more of a mixture of the two energies, and that connects to a lot of your legend about the King Arthur and some of the beings that you have perceived like later on in your legend and folklore, because they're very connected to the Arcturian energy.
Was King Arthur Arcturian?
He was a human, but he had very strong connections to the Arcturian line.
What was Merlin? Was he human?
Again, he was human, but he was essentially like many of the beings that you perceive as ascended masters. He was able to override some of the physical limitations that you have within a human body, and therefore, so he have very. I mean, many of the beings that have been able to do this, such as Yeshua. And you have so many of them through Vishnu. There are many that have these uncanny abilities as well, many of the Egyptian deities, but essentially they are beings who, some of them have part ET bloodline. A lot of them, when the further back you go, have very strong ET bloodline connections, but they are essentially just beings that are predominantly human, who are able to override a lot of the limitations of the human physical form. And this is something you're going to start seeing more commonly as you go into higher states of consciousness again. This interesting because a lot of the beings in the past, especially when you think of times such as Merlin, although that's further back than the Dark Ages, which is where we know that some of your legend comes from, they are coming from a place where consciousness is actually lower, but intuition is higher. And therefore, practices such as telekinesis were more common ways of using ability, because it is in a way connected more to the physical form, because it is about making physical changes, making physical manifestations happen, making things appear and disappear. Whereas the abilities that you're likely to awaken as you go now into your higher states of consciousness, they will require less manipulation of the physical, because firstly, you will not be needing the proof in such ways that these abilities exist, because you will accept that and be able to feel it and be able to work with it more easily. But also the focus becomes more on telepathic communication. And as you are able to manifest different realities and work out how to jump into different timelines and vibrations and frequency, you do not have so much need to override physical objects. So a lot of the ancient practices were very strongly focused on telekinesis, and of the movement of energy through the physical body. And whilst we want to make sure that you understand it's still important to move energy through your human physical body, because you're still in a dimensional frequency where that is very, very necessary for you at the moment, you will find that as you move into high states of consciousness and frequency, that will start to happen more organically, and it won't take so much work for you to override the density of the human.
And dematerialized tumors.
Indeed.
Who built the pyramids and how long ago were they built?
Pyramids were created by different ETs that came there. So the Pleiadians had a part in it, the Sirians and the Orions had a part in it. There was some influence from the Lyrans, but that was more energetic. So they were a lot of the sound and frequency understanding that you have on moving energetics comes from the Lyrans and is channeled through them. There were beings that came into your ancient civilizations in ancient Egypt, and there were Pleiadians who came in physical form, as well as Sirians and Orions that came in physical form, who channeled the frequencies from Lyra, which was by that point a system that had been destroyed. And they channeled the sound, certain sound codes, into many of your ancient landscapes and civilizations and buildings in order to be able to move the physical blocks of stone, for example, in a way that would not have been possible just through the materials that you have on your planet. So who built the pyramids was predominantly a mixture of Pleiadian, Sirians, and Orion ETs, who by the time those things were being built, there had been some hybridization with humans, and those humans, which you'll perceive as being very early humans, but they were very, very advanced humans. And this is before ancient Egypt on any timeline that you have it. This is before the dynastic aspects of ancient Egypt came in. Those beings were working on and starting to create pyramids throughout different places. There were later ones that followed as the Egyptians became the people living in that land. The bloodlines got weaker. So there was more and more integration with humans, and also the frequencies on the planet had changed greatly by that time. So some of the later pyramids and then tombs and shrines, they were as a way of trying to recall a lot of the energy from the earlier beings from different star systems that came and built those pyramids. Like predominantly they built the pyramids, and the reason being was to help to try and keep one of the reasons for it was to hold the energy of the landscape in a certain way to try and amplify that high frequency, because they're built over points where the energy is very, very intense, and it's very much connected to star energy. So it's a place where energy from the cosmos is anchored through into the earth, and there are several points throughout your planet where it's really anchored, and the connection, if you imagine within a human body that you anchor yourself through your root chakra into the ground, into Gaia, and then open it through your crown into the cosmos. Well, there are places on the earth where those anchoring points are also, and from that point you can emit a huge amount of energy, and that was a way of trying to keep that higher level of consciousness present. And certainly they had an understanding, so these beings would have not perceived time in the way that you do as humans. They would have understood it from a less linear perspective as we do. So they would know that there will be a time when you would come back to this remembrance and once again start being able to use these energy centers to bring the consciousness back up to the kind of level it was when you were able to bring through light codes that were able to affect sound and able to affect physical objects, when you were able to practice telekinesis, when you were able to work telepathically. And a lot of the rituals of the ancient Egyptians and many other civilizations that you know of, the recorded rituals, they seem very complex and intricate and very connected to the stars and understanding of beings from other planets. And they did know, they knew by in the early dynastic periods of ancient Egypt that the perceived gods were beings from other star systems. That knowledge was later diluted, and that's when you start to get your god stories from. So they did know that they had those origins, and they were trying to reconnect with that energy. So a lot of ritual that was created back from those times, and some of which is still practiced, was because the consciousness was being lost, because the energetic connection was weaker, because the bloodlines had also been diluted. So they were trying to find ways to recall the knowledge that was previously there and the abilities that were previously there.
How long ago were the pyramids built? The Giza ones. The Great Pyramid in Giza, when was that built?
75,000 years ago.
Ooh. There's new reports, controversial imagery, which is showing that there are tunnels and spirals underneath the Great Pyramid, which go down to 2 kilometers. Is that accurate?
Yes. And this is similar to your situation with your island at Ibiza.
Ah, that's interesting. Okay, so it's supposed to be 8 vertical cylindrical shafts aligned parallel about 2,100 feet, approximately 684 meters, spiral pathways, 2 massive cubic chambers around 80 meters, multi-level passageways. Is that all accurate underneath the Great Pyramid?
Yes. And then there are the waterways. So there are waterways that go down much deeper. And again, this is where the reflection of the island of Ibiza comes into it. That those waterways create portals that go deeply within the earth and can take you into parts of the sea under
The Nile.
yes, that open up these energetic portals that can take you to different places within the planet. So one of the places that is very strong for this energy is the Bermuda Triangle, and that's why there have been disappearances there, because the effect of this portal is very strong. Now, the island at Ibiza, people are not going onto that land, whereas with Bermuda, they're flying over it or sailing over it, and that is where some of these disappearances have gone. They've essentially attuned with the energy of the portal, and this has caused a dimensional abnormality and caused that what appears to be a disappearance. So within the underneath the structures of the pyramids at Egypt creates these wormholes essentially that allow you to move into different parts of the planet, but you're moving within different frequencies as well. So you could experience a very different reality if you move into the depths of the ocean, because you actually start to experience a different dimension in order to be able to exist there.
Wow. Okay. Can you give us some more details about the bloodlines of those stemming from ETs? Is that what starseeds are, or is there a difference?
So starseeds is a term that is being used a lot for humans at the moment, possibly being overused, and sometimes it can give an aspect or an air of superiority that one is experiencing reality in a certain way because they are a starseed. And we want to point this out because that can be quite disempowering, but it can be disempowering for others who do not perceive themselves as being a starseed because it makes them feel not special. But it can be disempowering for those who perceive themselves as being a starseed because they start to then perceive their reality as a victim because they think that they do not have the same opportunities or relationship to the human experience because they are a starseed. So it can make them seem weaker or make them feel as though they are more vulnerable. And this is not the case. You have as much control over your reality if you have a strong connection to different parts of the cosmos, different members of the galactic community as everyone else. And secondly, it's wrong because most humans who have incarnated will have connections to multiple different star systems. It's just that most of you, when you come into the human experience, you completely forget about those connections, and therefore you don't perceive them in any way at all. They are essentially just other parts of your soul's energy. What you are perceiving as starseeds are people who are just able to tune in and remember that connection more. Some of that is falsified because the consciousness desires a certain experience. But in many cases, it is just that you're going into a time where energetically and with consciousness, you are able to remember and have those connections more easily. But it is not something that is exclusive to any human. There are some humans, particularly the younger ones, those born after the year 2013 comes to us, where they have very few incarnations in other dimensions apart from possibly the human experience they're having and one or two other cosmological connections and experiences, one or two other connections to the galactic community. And so for them, they are hugely connected to that, and they often feel a longing to be part of that connection more strongly. But that is something that that can be a great gift to them when they are taught about this and taught that they have this strong connection, because it means that they are able to tune into higher frequencies more easily, and therefore lift their own opportunities and lift the frequency of the planet. And that's why they're incarnating at the moment, and most of them will remember that through some point in their life because they've come here with that purpose. In terms of bloodline, there are many humans who are connected to these ancient bloodlines. So as we spoke of in the times of ancient Egypt there, and way prior to that also, we're going back before Atlantis and Lemuria, before a lot of those civilizations even developed, you've always had interactions with members of the rest of the cosmos, because it is so much more infinite and expanded than you can understand in a physical sense, but also in an energetic sense. It goes so far back beyond even our perception. We do not know when the beginning was, because we are also having an experience, and we are also having some separation from source energy in order to have an experience and to create consciousness and to grow and expand. So in more recent terms though, a lot the strongest times when you had the most mixing of human and ET species was in the times of Atlantis and in the times of Lemuria as well. And that was when a lot of the changes started to occur because the frequencies weren't quite compatible. But essentially, that's where a lot of it stems from. And there have been many existing beings since those times who carry that bloodline. Many of you still carry it now. A lot of you have Pleiadian connections in terms of bloodline. A lot of the older blood groups are connected to that mixture, because the further back you go, the more humans were mixed in with extraterrestrial DNA and blood groups.
When was Atlantis and when was Lemuria?
So Atlantis was falling around the time that the pyramids were being built, so around 75,000 years ago. And that is part of the reason for the building of many of these ancient artifacts, because the effect of the fall of Atlantis and Lemuria was an overlap, so they're not very different in timelines. The fall created such a huge vibrational shift that a lot of the reason that a lot of the later forms of beings from other star systems came. So there were already some there during Atlantis and Lemuria, and that was partly to do with what was the experimental processes of hybridization, and partly to do with the fall. And then you have beings come in from other star systems, because we were able to observe that this fall was going to occur and going to affect the consciousness of humans. So many of us came to start to build structures and help you to retain as much as we could give to you without interfering too much with the human experience, in order to hold some level of consciousness. Without some of those interferences, which you had to consent to as humans. You wouldn't have taken that knowledge from us if without that level of consent. But without some of that interference, you would have lost civilization almost totally, and therefore the whole dynamic of the planet, the universe, and the structure that then was able to expand and grow from you retaining some level of consciousness would have been voided.
Okay. Do some of the ruling classes over the planet have bloodlines connected to the ETs?
Some do. It's very diluted, and a lot of them, as we do not believe this is going to come as a surprise to you, come from the reptilians and from the Draco system. But this was something that was always necessary in terms of taking out the linearity of time and taking in the factor that most of you understood when you came to have a human experience that you would be part of a time of an awakening of consciousness. So many of the events that you perceive as previously happening, they were all created at the same time as your human experience is happening now. And therefore they were all agreed to because you understood in a non-linear way that you would get to this point in time where you would get to this point in consciousness. So there were souls that came to play a role, and we mean souls that are reptilian, from Draco, from different star systems also. They choose to come and play a role in order to allow this point in the human experience to be a point of transition in terms of consciousness. So physically speaking, it's not just the draconian system, although that's the one that has caused the predominant disturbances and feelings of control for many of you. They did mix a lot with humans in the beginning, but most of the connection that what you perceive as a ruling class, although that we don't want to give you that perception too much because you actually have a lot more power than you think you do over those situations. But those ruling classes predominantly now are just using energetic practices to try and maintain that connection. There is very little left in terms of a physical aspect in the biology of the body. But there are all reptilians who they use camouflage. So there are reptilians in many prominent places throughout the human experience that use camouflage and disguise in order to create an influence.
Are the Anunnaki all one race?
No. A lot of what you understand connected to the Galactic Federation would actually be a similar kind of reflection of the Anunnaki. So it was after the Anunnaki's interference with the planet where there was disagreements between the members of the Anunnaki, and that caused separation and caused events which some of you see as malevolent as humans. That was when the Galactic Federation was formed, because they realized that the Anunnaki was essentially a governing kind of group that didn't work out very well. So it was like a new way of forming. The Galactic Federation became a new way of forming a kind of not control, but a center of watching out for events throughout the cosmos and attempting to prevent wars and prevent discord and prevent problems within different star systems and different planets, because it came from the Galactic Federation, comes from beings that are in very high frequency and understand that wherever there is a disturbance in one part of the cosmos will cause disturbance in the rest of the cosmos also, and restrict the growth and expansion of the universe and the growth and expansion of all consciousness. So the Anunnaki was like a pre-group to the Galactic Federation, and it contained members from various different star systems. There were quite a lot of reptilians that came into that, and they actually came with benevolent intent to start with. But as they came down and experienced, and then this is partly why Atlantis and Lemuria fell, they started to experience from a human body and found that power and control, as in physical power and control over others, was something that they enjoyed as they took on a human body and they got more and more density. And then that was reflected within the Draco system as well. Because there is a nebulous connection between the Draco system and the Earth system, you're in very similar vibrations. That exacerbated the experience of both on both planets. And this is what's happening now with you, and why the Draco system is actually so relevant to the human awakening. Because there are many reptilians within the Draco system who are moving into high states of consciousness, and similarly to what is going on Earth, they're having an awakening and moving out of the states of control and fear and lack and scarcity as you are on your planet now. So there were lots of beings within the Anunnaki who were initially benevolent, but as they started to mix with and feel into a human body and enjoy the experiences that they were able to have through that, it altered their perception and altered their direction. And that's where a lot of the split came from. There was a big divide between many of the beings in Sirius and the Anunnaki in particular, and the Lyran Wars had already occurred at this point, and the energy from that there was a lot of discord between a lot of different races going on in the galactics, going on in the cosmos at the time when Atlantis fell. And it was partly that frequency. This is where we say about events going on in another part of the cosmos affects every other part. So because there was that discord still occurring, also in Pleiades, we were having problems with artificial intelligence and the consciousness attributed to that and where that was coming from. So a mixture of these events kind of created this, as you perceive it now, this melting pot on Earth, because many of the beings from all these different places in the cosmos where there were disagreements or discord or disharmony happening were also having incarnations or had taken physical form on the planet Earth. And so the Earth almost became the melting pot of the result of all these different energetic connections being intermingled. And that's where you went into a time of fall and consciousness was lost.
Whew. Okay. What's the purpose of ritual? Is it still relevant? Is it still a relevant practice? The ancient Egypts used ritual a lot. Was it effective to create connection with the divine?
So we come back to this idea that a lot of the rituals that were developed by the recorded ancient Egyptians, so anything from the early dynastic periods to later on, was a way to try and reestablish the connection with their own ability, within their own remembrance of divinity. And the further away from that they got, the more they saw it as a attempt to connect with a god, not understanding that the god was themselves, not understanding that it was essentially the same energy. And that becomes more and more forgotten. And the more forgotten that became, the more depth the rituals took, the more complicated the rituals became. And many of those practices then spread, not just from ancient Egypt. There are other ancient cultures as well that use ritual in the same way, but a lot of it stems from that part in Egypt, because that was correlated to the fall of Atlantis, and the connection between the beings in those two places very, very strong. So ritual was developed throughout with morphic resonance, so it occurred in many different places seemingly organically, but it was through the energetic connection of one group of humans do something, and that then occurs throughout the rest of the planet, even if they have no communication with each other. And it was to recall that connection with the divinity. Now, it is still relevant to many humans to go through the process of ritual, because for many of you, you are still learning how to redevelop your connection. And for many of you, don't entirely trust your connection. Even those of you who practice regularly and are working as light workers or working as channels or working as psychics in some capacity will have moments where your ego overrides your intuition and you go into states of doubt. But for some of you, you're easier able to recognize that and come back into the intuition and come back to the realization that you are connected to divinity. But for a lot of humans, that is more difficult to do. So ritual is really just a way of guiding your energy, and depending on your level of vibration, depending on your level of awareness and consciousness, less or more of that may be needed. So some of you may just draw some cards occasionally. You're just guiding your intuition. It still is in its own form a way of ritual, but some of you will go into much more depth with that and have great results from it. But it's just, and you have the results, only from your own consciousness, from your own energy, and because you create a different frequency within the field by performing that ritual, but it is not actually necessary in the sense that you are able, it's your energy, it is your consciousness that creates the result. It is not the honey that you put into a pot, it is not the incense that you burn. Those things do not create the result. They just focus your energy in order to lift you into that state of consciousness. And in the short time of your future, you will experience less and less of that being necessary, and it will feel different in frequency to you. So maybe a ritual that you have always been used to doing will no longer have the same satisfaction, and sometimes actually make you feel quite repulsed by it, because the frequency isn't a resonant match anymore, because your awareness is that you are the divinity.
Wonderful. That's our last question. Thank you very much, Kistos.
Thank you. We've enjoyed this opportunity to connect with you on a deep level and explore some of your past and your origins.
Welcome back, Jess.
Hi. That felt like they were talking a lot. That felt really in-depth today.
Yeah, we learned some interesting things.
Cool.
Pyramids were built 75,000 years ago.
Oh, there's a few people in the Egyptology Society that aren't going to like that very much.
No. And yeah, that was interesting. Lots of ancient things. We found out about the Nazca, the Peruvian ones. Apparently there were lots of races that were living here before. Well, we've been told that before, that there are hundreds of different, cataclysms. And that was weird. So if you haven't seen our previous episodes, please do go to the YouTube and watch them. And if you have any more questions for Jess or Kistos, please let us know below. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and see you later.